Hello and welcome to another Author's Out board game review. This week we're going to look at Deadzone. Deadzone is a skirmish level miniatures based game for 2 players. You can play with a few more players, but you have to personally modify the rules because there's no rules for the game for more than 2 players built into the rulebook. Average play time is about 60 minutes, and that's once you have the game board set up. And finally, the recommended minimum age is going to be about 14 or up. Now this is a skirmish level game, which means each player is going to be controlling approximately 4 to possibly 12 models tops. Each one of the armies plays a little differently. One army is more of a swarm type army, which means it's going to have a large force on their side comparatively, while the other side is more of an elite squad, so they're going to have more of a smaller unit or squad on their side. I also want to note that I do have a Kickstarter copy of the game. I was a Kickstarter backer of this game. I put about $200 into it, so I have quite a bit more in the box than you would get at the actual retail level. So what I've done is I've gone through the box and I've removed everything that should be not included in the retail level. I'm hoping I got everything right, but if you notice anything that's not appearing in the retail box, please leave a comment in the YouTube comments. I would appreciate it. But I'm pretty sure after comparing the list and also the images on the side of the box, I'm pretty much sure I got about 100% correct on what's going to be in the retail box, which retails for $100. This is also going to be a video series. I'm going to break this down into 3 separate videos so you can find exactly what you want out of Deadzone. In the first video, I'm going to show you how to play Deadzone. It should be a very good tutorial for anybody who's never even cracked open the box or cracked open the rule book. You should be able to figure out the game and put it on the table and start having a little bit of fun. In the second video, I'm going to show you setup and actual gameplay. And in the final video, I'm going to go ahead and give you my thoughts of what I thought about Deadzone, the positives and the negatives, and my overall gameplay experience. Deadzone, like I said, is a skirmish level miniatures based game. The unique thing about Deadzone is that it's going to come with a whole bunch of components which are actually going to allow you to build the board as you play. You're basically going to take these 3-inch by 3-inch little squares and you're going to be able to put them together to form buildings on the map, which is allow you to build your battlefield where your battles are going to take place. The fun thing about Deadzone, which prevents it from being your overly standard kind of miniatures kind of game, is it's actually a missions-based game. Each player at the start of the game is they're going to get their own special mission, and the opponent doesn't know exactly what each player's mission is, which is really cool because when you'll see when I'm explaining it, adds kind of a bluffing mechanic to the game because these are active, interactive battlefields where there's things to find, ammo crates, intelligence, and various objectives. You don't know what your opponent's after, so you're trying to stop them all fronts, but the problem is you don't have enough units to stop them all fronts, so you need to gauge what your opponent's doing and stop them cold in an effort to win the game. Now, how do you win the game? There's 2 very distinct, easy ways to win the game. The first way is by accumulating 10 victory points, and since your opponent doesn't know what you're doing to gain your victory points, you're going to keep all your victory point conditions hidden, even if it's not an item that's going to give you victory points. So, for example, if your condition is to collect intel off the board, but you happen to kill some of your opponent's miniatures, you're still going to put those miniatures in your point pile, but you're not going to let your opponent know that they're not giving you any points because that's going to be a dead giveaway to your strategy. Alternately, if you're unable to complete your mission goals, there's the old standby of obliterating your opponent and completely wiping them off the map. The 2 things set Deadzone apart from your typical average miniatures kind of game. The first thing and the biggest thing, that at least for me, is the fact that this game does away with rulers. Everything is done on a square-based pattern, movement and everything, and the really cool thing is you don't have to be precise with your movements. Everybody gets to be able to move a certain space, but they can land anywhere they want in the target square they're moving into. If a person gets a 1 square movement, they can land anywhere in the square they want to go to. They don't have to be specific. You don't have to pull out the rulers, and you don't have to have precise movement, but where you land can be very important because the game does use true line of sight. The other really cool thing about the game is the game operates in 3 dimensionals. Now, a lot of board games we get used to where they're all just 2D and where we operate on flat ground. This game operates in the 3rd dimension. Now you have to imagine everything has multiple stories, multiple levels. It's basically like a Rubik's Cube where you're basically able to go through multiple levels. You can build these sceneries as high as you want, within reason of course, and as wide as you want as long as you fit the 8x8 square, making some very creative, very unique, and very fun battlefields. Now, of course, like most miniatures kind of games, everything comes unpainted. I've actually taken the time to go through and paint all my scenery, and I've also painted all my miniatures for use in the game, so it gives you a little bit of eye candy while I'm showing you how to play Deadzone. Before I show you how to play Deadzone, there's a couple quick concepts I want to make sure you understand, just so you understand the basics of exactly how the game plays. And also I want to let you know that everything you're seeing on this board is everything that comes in the retail box. This exact battlefield can be recreated with the retail box. These are 100% of all the pieces that come with the retail box. Again, I did comparisons just to make sure, so this is an actual doable battlefield with the entire retail box. The first thing to understand about Deadzone is, of course, it's a dice-based game, but the game uses 8-sided dice. And the way these 8-sided dice work is you're basically going to roll 3 dice. Every single time you're doing any action, you're going to roll 3 dice. But how well or how badly you're going to do in those actions is going to be modified by various modifiers. And those modifiers aren't going to modify what you actually roll. They're always going to modify the amount of dice you roll. And that's the most important thing to understand in this game. Everything is a basic 3 dice action. You're going to roll three 8-sided dice, and they're going to compare them to a target number. But they're going to get modifiers. Like you're going to get a modifier that says if you're on higher ground, you're going to roll 1 more 8-sided dice. If you're aiming before you shooting, you're going to roll another additional 8-sided dice. So it's possible to roll 4, 5, 6, and occasionally even 7. Or on those extreme rare occasions where you're throwing some cards in there for some extra bonuses, it's possible to roll 8 dice for 1 action. Also, the game uses exploding dice, and if you're unfamiliar with the term, whatever that, when you have exploding dice, that basically means when you roll the largest number on the dice that's used. So in a game that uses 6-sided dice, anytime you roll a 6, or in the case of Deadzone, a game which uses 8-sided dice, anytime you roll an 8 on one of the dice, you're basically going to count that 8 as a success, means it automatically succeeded with that 1 dice, and then you're going to roll an additional die. And if you roll an 8 again, that's going to be a second success. You're going to keep rolling until you stop getting 8s, which are going to be more successes, or until you get any number besides that 8. So it's possible by rolling only 3 dice to get really lucky and get 7, 8, or even 9 successes, depending on how many 8s you continue to get. Yes, it's rare, but you know, occasionally it can happen, and sometimes lady luck can be on your side and you can get a lot of successes. Now, I need to explain to you what are you rolling for, but before that I want to show you exactly what the stat cards mean for all the units in the game. Every single unit in the game is going to be represented by a statistics card, and these statistic cards are going to have stats on the top of them. They're going to have special abilities and some other things, such as how many points those units cost and things along those lines. But I'm going to break it down here for you just in the beginning. I'm going to go ahead and use the Peacekeeper Captain, which is the leader or one of the best leaders of the Enforcer Squad. If you look at the top of the card, you're going to see a series of numbers. You're going to see a number 4 above some bullets. You're going to see the number 5 above the fist. You're going to see a number 3 above a heart. You're going to see number 2 on top of a chest, which is armor. You're going to see a 3-3 number above a sun. Now what those numbers mean in order is the first number is how good you are at shooting. The second number is how good you are at fighting. The third number is how good you are at surviving when you're shot, hit, stabbed, or damaged in some way. The next number is how much armor you have, which reduces potential damage. And the final number is your leadership score. Now, I'm not going to deal on leadership score yet. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit when I talk about cards and command. But let's go back and look at these stats individually. Now, remember how I said everything in this game is using 3 8-sided dice, and you get extra dice to roll or minus dice to roll depending on various modifiers in the rule book, depending on exactly what you're doing. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to roll equal to or higher than your stats you're using that you're checking against. So for example, if you're doing a shoot action and your shoot stat is a 4, you're going to roll 3 dice, and every die that is 4 or higher is going to be considered a success. So back to our Peacekeeper Captain. If I am shooting, and we have our Peacekeeper Captain right here, if he happens to be shooting at this model right here, and that model is in range for him, and we know he's in range because the Peacekeeper Captain's gun says it's a range of 6, and we just simply count the squares. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this model is in range. I'll get into a line of sight in just a minute, but just showing you how this works. I need to roll 3 dice if I didn't have any modifiers. And I'm going to look for every roll that's going to be a 4 or higher, and that's going to be a success. So if I rolled a 2, a 3, and a 5, only one of my dice is a 4 or higher, so I simply got 1 success. So in this instance, I'd have 1 success, and then my opponent is going to try to survive being shot at. There are 2 different kinds of dice tests in the game. There's your standard dice test, where it's going to tell you to roll X amount of dice, and every dice that's X number or higher is going to be considered a success. And that's either going to be based on a stat you have or just a generic number that's based for whatever skill you're trying to use. Alternately, there is a contested dice test, which is basically you're going to roll all the dice you get with all your bonuses, and then your opponent's going to roll all the dice that they're going to get with their bonuses. You're each going to compare your amount rolled on each dice, and that's going to be your target number, and then you're going to count however many of your dice equal that number or higher. That's going to give you the amount of successes you had. So for example, in this instance where I'm shooting at my target, I rolled 3 dice. 1 die was a 5, which was 4 or higher, so I have 1 success. And now let's say this guy needs to survive being shot at, and with all bonuses and penalties, he's only got 3 dice. And he needs to get a 4 or higher on his dice roll also. Simply going to roll the dice. I'm going to count out how many of my dice are 4 or higher. And of course, I'm going to re-roll any 8s that I may get because there are going to be extra successes. In this example, without even rolling the extra dice, I got a 7, an 8, and an 8. So I know at least 3 of my dice are going to be 4 or higher because that was his target number. So I have at least 3 successes versus this guy, the enforcer captain, who only has 1 success. So we already know that he's already missed. But the amount of successes you get compared to your opponent matters because there's such a thing as doubling and tripling the amount of successes your opponent gets. So now that we see that we got 2 8s, we got to roll some more dice and possibly get some more successes. And we have. So remember, our target number was a 4 or higher for survival roll of being shot at by the enforcer captain. So we're going to look at every die that's a 4 or higher. We have a 6, a 6, a 7, an 8, and an 8. So we managed to get 5 dice that are 8 or that are 4 or higher. So we have 5 successes versus the enforcer captain's 1 success. So obviously the enforcer captain missed, and we managed to not only double, but we've also tripled the amount of successes that they got. Now you can basically look at the skill you're using, such as shoot, and it's going to tell you what happens if you manage to double or triple the amount of successes versus your opponent. Don't want to get ahead of myself, just know that it does matter. That is the basis of all dice tests in the game, though. You're basically going to roll some dice, compare them to a target number, count the amount of successes you get, and you're either going to win or you're going to have to compare that to your opponent who's going to roll some dice and try to get some successes also. Whoever gets the most is going to look at a chart or table, and that's basically going to give you the results of whatever action you were trying to perform. Now that you know how to roll the dice in the game, the next thing you need to understand is line of sight and the concept of cover. Now, cover is probably one of the only things that may cause arguments between players if it's not decided before the game begins. And the rule book actually tells you that before the game begins, you need to decide what counts as cover and what doesn't count as cover. Now, basically, the way the rule book says is you're going to basically pick squares on the board, and those are going to be considered cover squares. The first rule for that, though, is any square that is inside of a building. Now, these are all buildings, even though parts of the wall has been blown off. They all need to be considered that they're buildings. So if this model right here is inside this square, because it's inside what's left of the building, he's considered to be in cover. Also, you're going to have these little pieces of scenery that you're going to throw out on the board. Generally, you're going to pick 4 squares in the game. Random, however you want to decide when you're building the game and building up the game board. And you're going to pick those squares as cover squares. And basically, you're going to put these little bits of scenery in those squares to remind you that those are cover squares. Now, if any model is ever in a square with one of these pieces of scenery, they're considered to be in cover. It doesn't matter if they're hiding behind it or if they're off to the side or anything like that. These little bits of scenery are considered cover squares. So even though this model, actually a better example would be this model right here, even though this model can see this model, and this model can also see this model, but he can see less of him because of this bit of scenery there. It doesn't matter, since the square is considered a cover square, every model who's in that square is considered to have cover. Even if this guy happens to mosey on into the square by doing his movements, this guy is now also going to be in cover. If this guy happens to move over there, now all 4 of these guys are going to happen to be in cover. Cover is actually a square. Don't confuse cover with line of sight and clear line of sight, which will be very important in just a second. The next thing to understand about the game is line of sight and clear line of sight. Now, what you're going to do to get clear line of sight is you're actually going to get down behind the model if you have to. If there's any kind of discrepancies at all, you're going to get basically down behind the model, and you're going to look basically at what that model can see. And if that model just happens to be able to see what it's looking at, then it's got clear line of sight. Now, what you want to do is you want to compare, can you see the entire model, or can you only see part of the model? And by that I mean, if you can see every single square inch of that model, whether there's just a gun tip, part of its foot, part of its toe, or whatever, if you can see 100% of the model, you have clear line of sight. Now, if anything at all obstructs any part of the model at all, for example, this guy happens to be a little bit back here, and this piece of scenery was right in front of him, and we look behind this guy and look right down at him, we'd be able to see that part of his base is partially covered, so we don't want to have 100% clear of line of sight. Whereas if we look from this model's eye and look towards this target, we can see that he sees 100% of this model, so he's 100% clear of line of sight. So now where the confusion can come in this game is it's possible for a model to be in cover, because this guy is in a square with cover, but he's also 100% line of sight of these 2 guys. So don't get confused by the game. Cover and line of sight are 2 entirely different things. Cover is part of the scenery and part of the game board. Line of sight is true line of sight, and why it's called true line of sight. If you can see it, you can shoot it because you have line of sight to it. And the important thing to understand about line of sight is if you can see any part of a model, then you can shoot at the model, even if you're only seeing a fingernail or a claw or a toe or the tip of the gun. If you can see any part of the model, you can shoot at it. But if you see 100% of the model, you have clear line of sight. Don't get cover and line of sight confused. They are different. So just for a moment, if we were to completely ignore range, because we always have to consider range and just how far we can shoot when we're using the weapons for our miniatures, just using a point of reference, using this guy as a point of reference, he has clear line of sight to this model right here. He has clear line of sight to this model, but this model is also in cover. This guy has line of sight to this model, but he does not have clear because the guardrail blocks part of the miniature. Same thing for this miniature, whereas if we came across and looked all the way across at this guy, he, at surface level, if we look from the top of the game, we can think that he might have clear line of sight, but if we actually got down to this model's level, we would see that part of this guardrail is blocking part of this miniature, so he does not have clear line of sight to this model. Then if we look down here to the dog, we have clear line of sight. We look across to this guy right here, we have clear line of sight. Then we happen to have this guy hiding right back here. There happens to be a window in this building right here. He can see through the window, see the model. He doesn't have clear line of sight, but he can only see part of him to shoot him. The next thing we got to understand about this game is measuring distance. Now everything in this game is counted by squares. We're not going to break out the rulers or anything like that. It's kind of the cool thing about Deadzone. It's not one of those games where we're measuring minute details. We're going to be off by a millimeter and not be able to do what we want to do. Everything is basically going to be figured on a a square-based system as drawn on this little game board that you play the game on. Everything in the game is going to be using these squares for your movement. It's going to use it for your range and for calculating various things. Now the nice thing about this game is it doesn't have to be precise. If you're going to do a move action, for example, this dog right here wants to do a move action, and the move action he's going to perform is going to allow him to move one square. And again, you can move diagonals. He can move from here to any one of these outlined squares, and he can land anywhere in the square he wants to. So for example, this dog wants to be able to move here, but he doesn't want to be able to be shot by this captain right here who would have line of sight. If we came and looked across like this, he could go from here to here, and while it's still the same one square movement, he's no longer in line of sight for the captain right here, which makes him safe. Whereas opposed if he would have took his movement to one square to right here, he'd be in line of sight to the captain and probably get shot and blown away pretty darn quickly. Range is also calculated by squares, and this can get a little bit challenging because remember I said this game operates in the full three-dimensional way of playing the game. This guy happens to be up 3 levels, and so if we want to calculate range, if this guy right here wanted to shoot at one of these guys down here in the square, you may think that he's only 1 square away. Well, it's not true. These guys are actually multiple squares away because you have to shoot through this square. Remember, we're operating in 3-dimensional space. You also have to shoot in this space. So these guys down here are actually 2 squares away. Whereas opposed, this guy right here also happens to be 2 squares away. That's where a little bit of the complexity of the game can come in, just due to the 3-dimensional nature of the game. So using our sniper guy here as a point of reference, if you want to shoot at these guys would be 5 squares away. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 squares away. This guy right here, well, he wouldn't shoot one of his compatriots, but if we were happening to shoot this guy, he'd be 2 squares away. These guys right here, even though they're next to him, are actually 2 squares away. He needs to shoot 2 squares away. While this big guy over here happens to be 5 squares away, and we just count that across. Again, it's one of the kind of challenging things about the game is counting and measuring 3-dimensional space, but once you know how to do it, it becomes like second nature. And now finally, the final thing I need to explain to you before I actually show you how to play Deadzone, and this is kind of a long introduction, so I'm sorry about that, but these are some concepts, core concepts you really need to understand before you start playing the game. Every single model has one of 4 levels of aggression, and you can be in one of these 4 stages, and every player or every model is in always one of these 4 stages of aggression. The stages of aggression in order are suppressed, which basically means you are down on the ground. You're basically hugging concrete for dear life, trying to avoid being shot. The next thing you can be is pinned, which means you're still basically on the ground, but you're not quite kissing concrete next. The next thing you can be is you can be alert, which means you're basically up, standing, and ready to take any action. And the final level of aggression can be enraged. Now the only big difference between alert and enraged is if you're enraged, you get bonuses to all your hand-to-hand combat, but you're at penalties to your shooting. Whereas alert, you get no bonuses to melee, and you don't get any, you don't get any bonuses to melee, and you don't get any penalties to shooting. And then you have pin, which means you're basically on the ground, but you can still take actions on your turn. And then you have suppress, which means the only thing you can do is try to get unsuppressed or try to raise your aggression level, because that's the only thing you can do on your turn. The final basic thing to understand is basically just scattering. And scattering is very, very simple in this game. You notice that the game uses 8-sided dice, which is pretty convenient because it allows you to match the various corners that you can always travel to. If you need to scatter anything, for example, if this guy happened to be the target of a nice little grenade, and the grenade missed, you're simply going to roll an 8-sided, and you're going to count around as if it was a clock face, and that's where the grade's going to land. So this would be your 1, 2, 3, 4. Since I rolled a 4, the grenade would land here. 5, 6, 7, 8. Very simple, keeps it very nice and easy. Nice thing about the square patterns is it does match the D8, which makes scattering extremely simple in the game. Now that you understand the basics of Deadzone, I'm going to go ahead and show you exactly how to play the game. The game is broken down into rounds, and each round is broken down into turns. During the turns, the players are going to get the chance to activate their models, and it's basically meaning I go, you go, I go, you go, until we've activated all our models. And once all the models have been activated, that's going to end the round, and we're going to start a new round. At the very beginning of the game, you're going to roll for initiative, and you can do it the old standard way where you have a roll off, where you can simply say 1 through 4 I go first, 5 through 8 you go first. It really doesn't matter. But from now on, after that point, you're no longer going to roll for initiative. The way initiative is going to be determined on the following rounds is the player who finishes activating all their models first is also going to be going first in the following round. So it does give a slight advantage to the teams who happen to have a smaller force, because they're most likely going to be able to finish moving all their models first, which is going to kind of give them a lock in future turns to have the initiative. Again, just to reiterate, the very first round you're going to roll for initiative, and then from then on, the person who's going to start, be the first player in every following round, is going to be the person who got finished moving all their models on the prior turn. On a player's turn, if they happen to have initiative, what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to activate at least one of their models. Now, you have to activate at least one of your models. You can't choose to pass unless you have less models left to activate than your opponent. So for example, on my turn, if I only have 2 models left to activate and my opponent happens to have 5 models left to activate, since I only have 2 models left and it happens to be my initiative, I can pass my turn and force my opponent to go and continue moving models as many as they're allowed to on their turn. Then would come back to me, and if I still happen to have less models to activate, I can again pass my turn. But the moment I have equal or more models to activate than my opponent, I have to move at least one of my models on my turn. Now, the amount of models you can activate on your turn is going to be based on your command stat. Now, we'll go ahead and look at our Peacekeeper Captain again, since he's a pretty good model example for us to use. What we're going to do is we're going to look at our command stat, and we're going to see that's a series of 2 numbers separated by a hyphen. Now, don't get confused. We need to add these 2 numbers together, and that's going to tell us how many models we can activate on our turn. Each player's team is going to have 1 leader on it. If our leader happens to be defeated, we're going to choose a new leader, and that's the one we're going to be using for the command stat. So we can only have 1 leader at a time, and generally you want to pick the leader with the highest command stat, and that's going to tell you how many models you can move on your turn. Now again, back to the Peacekeeper. His command stat is a 3-3, and I'll get to why it's a separate number in just a few moments here. But what you're going to do is, whoever your leader is, you're going to add those 2 numbers together, and that's how many models you can move on your turn. So if you happen to have a command stat of a 3-3, you can activate 6 models on your turn. If you happen to have a command stat of only a 2-2 for your leader, you can only activate 4 models on your turn. And if you only are stuck with a leader who has a 1-1 command stat, you can only activate 2 models on your turn before it's time to let your opponent take their turn and move as many models as they can based on their leader's command stat. Once you figure out your command stat and how many of your models you can activate up to on your turn, remember, activate at least 1 unless you have less miniatures than your opponent left to activate, and up to the command stat of your leader. Once you figure out what that is, you can start activating your models. Now you activate 1 model at a time, and you complete all the actions with that model before you move on to the next miniature. And on a miniature's turn, they can do either one of 2 things. They can take 1 long action, or they take 2 short actions. Now the trick with short actions is you can't take the same short action twice in a row. Now I don't want to confuse things yet, but long actions are things such as fighting or trying to break off. Short actions are things such as trying to move 1 square or shooting at an opponent or blazing away at a square. The trick is you can't take the same action twice on a single model's turn. So if you wanted to move, you can move, which is a short action, but you couldn't do move, move as two short actions. You'd have to do something like a move and a shoot, or move and nothing if there's no additional short actions you wish to take. So again, each model is going to take one long action and two short actions, but those short actions can't be replicated or done twice in a row. You can't do two shoot actions, can't do two move actions, you can't do two blaze away actions, but you can do any combination of those as an example. Now the only trick to not being able to use the same action more than once on a single turn with one model is battle cards. Now battle cards are a really cool thing that allow you to break the rules, add some modifiers, and add a couple different twists to the game. Every player is going to start with a hand of exactly 4 battle cards out of a deck of 20 cards. Now, the nice thing about these battle cards is they're actually a timer for the game to make sure there's never a stalemate. If you happen to go through all your battle cards and you have no more battle cards to draw, you have no more battle cards in your hand, the game ends immediately. Everybody adds up their score. Whoever has the most victory points, even if nobody's managed to make it to 10 victory points, is going to be the winner. Battle cards actually allow you to do pretty darn cool things, such as move. Even if you've already used the move action, you can play a move battle card to take an extra move and surprise your opponents who don't think you can reach them. Really, really good for the plague player if they want to get in close on their opponent. Battle cards will also help you do extra actions, such as doing headshots, which give you a chance to do extra damage, armor-piercing shots. They can allow you to get bonuses to fight, get bonuses to break away. Battle cards can do a heck of a lot of things and add a lot of fun and variety to the game. Now, like I said, every player starts with exactly 4 battle cards in their hand, and you're forced to actually play at least one battle card on your turn. The thing about battle cards is, though, you can only play one battle card on one of your models per turn as a on-your-turn action battle card. There's 2 different kinds of battle cards in the game. There's battle cards that you can only play on your turn, and there's battle cards that are called reactionary battle cards. Now, the really, really cool thing about all these battle cards is they all have 2 uses on them, and it's never the same 2 uses. So you always have this quite challenging little thing where you want to decide, well, do I want to use this one half of the battle card, but then I'm not going to be able to access the other half of it, which adds a kind of a cool decision making process every time you want to use one of these battle cards. So I may want to use this battle card for a move, but if I use it for a move, I can't use it for the other half of the battle card, which is the +1 shoot action. I have to decide what I want to use it for, spend it, and then put it in my discard pile. And once a card goes on the discard pile, you'll never get it back except from a lucky roll on a command action. And I don't want to get ahead of myself, but just know the only way to get a card back out of your discard pile is from a lucky command action, and you get very limited command actions during an entire game. After the players have played all the battle cards they can on their turn, after they've activated all their models and everything has been resolved, you can move to the end of the turn phase where you're basically going to either discard one battle card from your hand if you did not play one, at least one during your turn. So again, this forces you to go through those battle cards and also guarantees this game will never go past 20 turns. After this, we're going to go ahead and look at our command stats. So let's go ahead and look at our Peacekeeper Captain again with his command stat of a 3-3. This is going to tell us how many cards we're going to draw, which is the first number of your command stat. And the second number is going to tell you how many cards of the drawn cards you're going to keep. Now don't get confused there. You have an unlimited hand, and towards later rounds, especially if you have some of these guys with the higher command stats, you may have a hand of 7, 8, 9, or even 10 cards depending on how you're playing your cards if you're being a little conservative, which I don't recommend. But if you do play that way, it is possible. So again, you're going to draw cards based on the first number of your command stat, and of those cards you drew, you're going to keep as many as your second command stat. So if your command stat happens to be a 3-1, you're going to draw 3 cards, and of those 3, you're going to put 2 back in your draw deck on the bottom of your draw deck. Don't put them in your discard pile. They are going to go back in your battle deck, but at the bottom of your draw pile. Whereas our Peacekeeper Captain happens to have that 3-3 stat, he's going to draw 3 cards every round, and he's going to keep 3 cards every round. So you're going to have a large hand of cards. But if he gets killed, the next player or the next model in line with the next highest command stat is going to become your next leader. And if you happen to go from a 3-3 down to a command stat of a 2-1, you're going to be drawing 2 cards and only keeping 1. So I can hit how many battle cards you're going to be drawing at the end of every turn. And of course, at this point, don't forget, if you have no cards in your draw deck from your battle cards to draw from, and if you happen to have no cards left in your hand, the battle has timed out. The game is over. You're going to add up the victory points. Whoever has the most victory points, even if nobody's reached 10 victory points, is going to be the victor of the game. After you've done all that, you're going to remove all the activation tokens from all the models. And again, I didn't show these earlier, but there are activation tokens you're going to lay down next to each model to show that that model is activated so you don't get confused. Since we moved all our models, we need to remove all our activation tokens, and we're ready to start a new turn. And remember, the player who finished moving all their models first is going to be the first player in the next round. You're going to go ahead and start doing that until you go through the complete game and you win either by getting 10 victory points, wiping out your enemy, or you just happen to time out the game. And again, whoever has the most victory points is going to win. That's the basics of Deadzone in a nutshell. The only thing left to do is to show you exactly what each model can do on their turn. Each model has quite a few options available to it. I'm just going to go ahead and run through all these options that each model can do, just so you get a general feel of how the game plays. Now, the first action a model can do is the command action. Now, only certain models can use the command action, and the command action can only be used a certain amount of times during the entire game. You get a couple of counters to keep track of those. Once you burn through all those counters, you can no longer use the command action. Now, who can use the command action is any one of your leaders, and you can see if a card is a leader by simply looking at it. Looking back at the Peacekeeper Captain, we see the text on him that says that he is a leader card. Also, anybody who has the ability Strategist or the ability Tactician can also use a command ability. Now, everybody's going to be accessing the same command pool on your side. So if you only happen to have 3 command tokens, but you happen to have 1 leader and 1 tactician, they can each burn through those 3, but they don't get 3 each. It is 3 total. The amount of command tokens you're going to get is going to be based on what kind of units you have in your squad. For every leader you have in your squad, you're going to get 1 command token. For every tactician you have in your squad, you're going to get 1 command token. For every strategist you have in your squad, you're going to get 2 command tokens. So going back to our Peacekeeper Captain, we see that he is a leader and he's also a strategist. So if he's part of our squad, we're actually going to get 3 command tokens just for having him as part of our squad. Now the trick is, if we have one of our guys who gives us command tokens and they're defeated, they're going to take their command tokens out of the pool. So if we happen to have 4 command tokens and our Peacekeeper Captain dies, he's going to take his 3 command tokens with him when he dies, leaving us with only 1 command token. The ability command is a long action. Now remember, you get 1 long action or 2 short actions on your turn. So if you do 1 long action, that's all that model's going to do. And basically you're going to announce that model. For example, we'll take our Peacekeeper Captain, go ahead and pick on him just a little bit more for a little while. And we're going to go ahead and announce that he's going to do the command action. To do the command action, we are going to roll the dice, and we're going to be looking for a certain amount of successes. And the amount of successes that we're going to get is going to allow us to do various 1 of 3 things. The first thing we need to do is we need to figure out if we were able to successfully complete a command action. So we're going to roll the dice, and in this example I rolled an 8, a 6, and a 4, and we're looking for a 6 or higher is going to be a success. So we know I have at least 1 success, and I have at least 1 more success. Remember, the game uses exploding dice. So I'm going to take this 8, and I'm going to roll another die, and I'm going to get a 7. So I basically have a 6, 7, and 8, so I have 3 successes, which is the best result you can ever get from a command action. Once you've seen if you succeed or failed in a command action, you can do 1 of 3 things. The first thing you can do, and the ability is going to be adjusted by just how many successes you got. Since I got 3, it's going to work the best. You can either command one of your own units to take an additional attack. You can force one of your opponents to lose an attack, or you can manage to draw another card. Now, however many successes you roll is going to judge just how well you can do. So if I only happen to get 1 success and I want to have one of my units attack, I can only command 1 unit within 4 squares, and I can have them take an attack of any kind of short action. But if I only had 1 success, I can only pick a model who hasn't activated this turn. If I happen to get 2 successes, I can pick any model within 4 squares of my leader who can take another action, even if they've already activated. And if I happen to get 3 successes like you saw, I can actually pick any one of my friendly models within 8 squares of my leader. They can take any action they want as long as it's a short action. It doesn't matter if they've already activated this turn or not. I can pick one of my guys within 8, and they can go ahead and take a free action. The other thing you can do with a command action is you can force another one of your opponent's units to be considered activated so they don't get to activate this turn. And again, the various degrees of success is going to judge how far away and how badly you're going to be able to affect them. And finally, the third thing you do with a command action is you can draw another card. Or if you get 3 successes like I did, you can actually draw a card from your discard pile, any one of the cards from your discard pile, and add it immediately to your hand. So again, that shows the various degrees of success, and then also shows you how the command action works. The next action a model can do on their turn is a move action. Now move actions is a short action, so you can do, remember, 2 short actions on your turn. And basically you pick one of your models and you're going to go ahead and move them to any adjoining square you like, as long as it's within range and not blocked for any various reasons. Here's the trick to this though. Every single model has a size on the model. We'll go ahead and look at our piece captain, and we'll see in the corner a square with a couple dots. Now the amount of dots is the size of the model. You can have anywhere from 1 dot for your small infantry models, all the way up to 4 dots or 3 dots when you have your Plague Stage 1 kind of model. Now, Plague Stage model is a 3, our Peacekeeper Captain is a 2. Some of these smaller models are of size 1. You can only have as many models in a single space up to a total of 4 size levels. So, for example, we have our big Plague Stage 1. He's a size 3, so he's going to be 3 of the 4 models that my side can have in a team. I can have this dog here, which is a size 1. That'd be a total of size 4 models right there. But I couldn't have one of these stage 2s because they're a size 2. Plus a size 3 would be a total of 5. So I couldn't have all these units in one square. And again, that's per side. So while the Plague player may have a total of 4 sizes worth of guys in the square, I can still put my size 2 guy there. Even though that'd be a total of 6, it's 4 per side. So I can have my size 2 guy there, plus a size 1 guy there. That'd be a total of 3 sizes versus our 4. That's the max amount of units that you can have in any square on the board. There's one important thing to understand about this game is your opponents will never be allowed to touch your models for any reason. If they throw a grenade that knocks your model across or anything like that, each player who owns their own model is responsible for placing their models and moving their models everywhere along those lines. That's very important for grenades. That's also important for line of sight and everything. Just remember, you never move your opponent's models at all. And also understand that squares such as these ramps and these walkways, since they're half size, that also means that only smaller units can fit on them. So our Plague 3 guy here happens to be a Plague level 1 who happens to be a size 3 model is actually too big to fit on this bridge. Since he's a 3 and a bridge can only have up to 2 sizes worth of models, he can't actually fit there, which is actually pretty nasty. If you happen to have a sniper here just like this, I could take pot shots at him forever and he could never enter that space. He's going to have to find another way to get a hold of my sniper. Now, every bridge can have up to a total of 2 sizes worth of models, and again, that's per team, so I could have these 2 size 1 guys, plus my sniper here. Even though that's a total of 3, it's 2 per side, so it's not too much for that bridge. The move command is also how you happen to pick up various items that are on the game board. Now, earlier I told you that the game board is going to be set up with a whole bunch of items like ammo, intelligence, and various different things. These are going to be represented by these green tokens, which are double-sided. The back side is going to show you exactly what it is, and the front side is going to be placed face up, and these are actually all going to be randomized, so none of the players actually know exactly what that is going to be until they happen to use a move action to move in the space and go ahead and reveal exactly what that item happens to be. Additionally, each move action only allows you to reveal one of these tokens at a time. So if this guy happened to move into this square, as part of the move action, I can go ahead and reveal one of these. But when my next turn comes around, when I get an additional activation, I'm going to have to spend another move action to go ahead and reveal exactly what this item happens to be. Which can be pretty darn tough if I don't have a card or something like that. If I happen to move into the square with my stage 2 play guy, and I happen to pick this right here, and then I can't take any more move actions, so this guy happens to move into the square and reveals this item, which happens to be a possible objective for one of the missions. This guy's gotten lucky and he's gotten the mission objective, and this guy happened to miss it. Luckily, anytime one of the models enters a square with another model, it creates a fight action. Now, the important thing to understand here is that anytime you move into a square with an opponent's model, you instantly start a fight between those 2 models. Now, if there happens to be multiple models from your opponent in the same square, you get to decide who you're going to fight. But the really important thing to understand here is that anytime you move into a square, as part of that move action, you're going to create a fight action. You're not going to take an additional fight action. Part of that move is going to cause a fight action. That's a very important distinction, especially when we get into free actions. Don't want to get ahead of myself here, just know the distinction. Anytime you start a fight action, the person who started the fight action is going to roll dice. Now remember, you're going to take 3 dice, plus bonuses based on the table, and those bonuses are going to give you additional dice to roll. And you're going to roll the amount of dice based on your fight stat, and you're going to get successes based on your fight stat. Your opponent is then going to get to roll dice. Now remember, again, you'll start with a basic 3 dice. Get extra bonuses for additional dice or bonuses that you may have, and you look for successes. And then you're either going to compare it to your survive or your fight stat, depending on whichever is better. Whoever gets the most successes is going to get the best result. Of course, you don't need a move to use a fight action. It just happens to be that if you do move prior to doing the fight action, it does give you an extra bonus. And on top of that, again, like I said, if you move into a square with an opponent and then fight with them, it's not actually considered a fight action, it's considered a movement action. And since you can't repeat the same action twice, if you happen to do a move action and somehow you have the ability to perform a fight action for a short action, because normally it's a long action, but if somehow you have that ability, you could move into the square, do your fight action as part of that move, and then do an additional fight action as an example. So far, that's not possible in the rules, but there's still 2 more factions that come out, and I don't know if anyone's going to get a special bonus that allows them to do fights actions as a short action, so I definitely want to include that example. But with the factions that come with the box, you can't do that, because fighting is a long action. The next thing you can do is if you happen to be in a square with a Type 2 plague, or even worse, with a Type 1 plague, who are absolutely merciless melee combatants. The last thing you want to do is be stuck in that square, especially if you happen to be just your standard shock trooper. So the next thing you can do is you can do what's called a break-off action. And to do a break-off action, you're going to roll some dice, and you're going to compare however many successes you get versus however many successes your opponent gets who's trying to keep you in the square. If you succeed, you're going to get out of the square. If you fail, you're going to be stuck in the square. And if you fail bad enough, the model you're trying to escape from is actually going to potentially do some damage to you. The important thing to remember here, though, is that if you happen to be in a square with an opponent, any kind of enemy unit from your opponent, you can't just leave the square on your own free will. You have to actually perform a successful break-off action. If you do succeed, you can leave the square. If you fail, you're stuck in the square. And again, if you fail really miserably, you're going to take some damage. The next kind of action you do is what's called a blaze away action. Now, blaze away is a really nice action to do is if you happen to be in a type of positioning where you can't quite see your opponent's model. Remember, everything in this game uses true line of sight. So if this trooper happens to be in this square right here, and he wants to somehow take out this dog right here, he can't really do it because he can't see the dog model because this building blocks it. But he does have line of sight to the square, so we can go ahead and do what's called a blaze away action. And basically what you're doing with a blaze away action is you're just laying complete suppressive fire into the target square in the hopes of force this creature, animal, or whatever it is to hit the dirt and prevent from being shot at. The nice thing about a blaze away action is if you force them to hit the dirt too hard, and by that I mean you force them to roll pretty miserably, then they're actually potentially going to take damage, or they can actually get shot. And basically this is represented by the fact that you happen to put a bullet through a piece of concrete, happens to penetrate and still manages to hit your target. And the way the blaze away action is going to work is you're basically going to pick your model, and he's going to pick the target square that he's going to be shooting at. Again, you have to be able to see the square. And again, remember, this game is 3D space, so if it helps you, if you want to have one of these pieces of scenery to see if you can actually see the square, if you want to build one of these just to put off to the side to see, you probably won't need to do that. I've never had to do that, but just in case, if that helps you when you're learning the game, whatever it needs to do. But if you can actually see this 3D 3" by 3" by 3" square, you can go ahead and blaze away at it. If you can blaze away at it, again, you're going to roll dice, you're going to count up your successes. Then your opponent, and every single opponent who happens to be in that square, so if you blaze away at a square that happens to have 3 guys in it, every one of those is going to have to make a survive test, and depending on how well or how badly they roll, they're either going to be unaffected, they're going to be knocked down, they're going to be pinned, or they may be suppressed, or if they roll bad enough, they actually may be defeated. Now on a model's turn, if they happen to be knocked on the ground, they can always do what's called a get mean action, which allows them to raise their aggression level. Now remember, there's 4 levels of aggression. There's suppressed, there's pinned, there's alert, and then there's enraged. So if you happen to be on the ground and you happen to be suppressed, which is the lowest level of aggression, the only action you can do, and this is the only action you can do, and this takes up your entire turn, making it a long action, is you can go from suppressed to pinned. And the game comes with tokens to denote this. You use those tokens, you lay them next to your model, lets you know if you're suppressed or pinned or not. If a model happens to be pinned, they can spend a short action, go from pinned to alert, and you simply stand the model up, and they can still take a short action afterwards, because remember, you do get 2 short actions on your turn. Only suppressed to pin makes you stay on the ground, you can't do any other actions. Pinned to alert would allow you to go ahead and stand back up. And of course, finally, if your model is alert, you can go ahead and use a short get mean action to go ahead and raise your anger level or your alertness level all the way up to enraged. Now remember, be careful with enraged, because if you're enraged, you get +1 to your melee, but you get -1 to your shooting action. So guys like your type 1 play guys, good to go ahead and get them enraged. Your guys who happen to have the guns, probably not such a great idea to let them get enraged. The next action you do is you can do what's called an aim action, and aim, all it does is leads into a shoot action. Nice thing about aim is it's a short action along with shoot, but the bad thing about this is if you're going to aim, you can't be moving at all, because you have to use a shoot action immediately after using an aim action. And what you need to do is you simply pick a model that hasn't moved yet, and you're going to say he's going to take an aim action. That's going to give him a bonus to a shoot action, which leads us into the final actions your models can take on turn. The first of those is the shoot action, and shoot is a lot like any other actions. You're basically going to see if you have line of sight to your target. So if this guy wanted to shoot our stage 1 play guy, we want to see if he has line of sight. And then if we have line of sight, we want to see if we have clear line of sight, because that's going to give us bonuses. Then we're going to check to see if he's in cover. That's going to give him defensive bonuses. We're going to roll dice. We're going to look for successes based on our fight stat. Whoever we're shooting at is going to go ahead and roll dice based on their survive stat. Again, whoever gets the most successes is going to judge the results, whether somebody misses, gets shot badly, or is killed. Now this is probably a really good time to talk about the lethality of Deadzone. In Deadzone, to keep things a little more simplistic, and also to help with the upkeep and the bookkeeping of the game, every single model in the game can either be uninjured, injured, or dead. So the first time you take a point of damage, you're going to move to injured. The second time you take a point of damage, you're going to be dead. And if you happen to be uninjured and you take 2 points of damage, you're going to go from uninjured through injured and all the way through dead. And the way this is going to work is by comparing how many successes you got versus your opponent. So let's go ahead and look back at our shoot action. We're going to take a full shoot action using this enforcer versus this stage 1 plague. What we're going to do is we're going to look at all of our bonuses. So we're going to take 3 dice, which is our basic starting. Remember, we always start with 3 dice for every one of our rolls. And then we're going to look at our potential bonuses. We're going to add 1 because this guy is going to go ahead and aim before he takes the shoot action. Then we're going to add 2 more dice to our roll because we have a clear line of sight from this model to this one. If we got down on our knees, if we had to, and look from this model's head all the way to this guy, we can see that we see the entirety of our plague stage 1 model. Finally, we're going to get 1 more die because we happen to be on higher ground than our target. This is going to give us a total of 7 dice total to roll. And since this is just our standard enforcer model, we're going to need a 4 or higher to see if we hit. So we're simply going to roll all the dice, and we'll look for any of the dice that are a 4 or higher. And again, remember, any 8s are going to be automatic success, and we're going to roll again to see if we get any additional. So we see we have a 4, a 4, a 2, a 2, a 1, and a 7, and an 8. So we know the 2 2s and the 1s are misses. The 2 4s, the 7, and the 8 are a hit. Since we got an 8, we got to get an additional roll in there, which is going to give us a 7. So we have a total of 4, 4, 7, 7, and 8 for a total of 5 successes. Now the stage 1 plague now has to make a successful survive test to avoid taking damage. Now remember, all of our rolls are going to be a basis of 3 dice that we're going to start with. Now the only bonuses we get for our survive test when we're being shot at is we get a +1 if we're in cover, and we also happen to get, if we happen to be pinned or suppressed, we're going to get an additional +1. Our level 1 plague is not in cover. Remember, these signify cover and the inside of buildings signify cover, and he's also not suppressed or pinned. So he's basically only going to get 3 dice to roll, and we need to get successes, and our target number we need to roll is a 4 or higher, because our level 1 plague has a level, or has a 4 survive stat. So we're going to go ahead and roll over our dice, and we're going to get a 3, a 7, and an 8. Well, we know the 3 isn't high enough to meet the 4 or higher, so we're going to go ahead and re-roll that since we do have a 7 and an 8. And remember, every time we get an 8, we get an additional roll, and we're going to get a 1. So we have a 7 and an 8, 2 successes, versus our enforcer who got 5 successes. So we have 5 versus 2 successes. We managed to double however many successes we got versus our opponent. And remember, doubling and tripling sometimes gives you additional bonuses. So the first thing we need to do is, since we double, we need to figure out exactly what doubling does in this instance. When you're shooting, double means that your target is going to lose 1 level to their aggression level. Now remember we said our level 1 plague is at enraged, so he's going to go from enraged down to alert. So we remove the token that we used to signify his enraged status. So that's the effect of doubling. Now we need to figure out exactly how much damage he's going to take. We're going to take the difference in successes, and that's going to be our potential damage. So we have 2 successes for our level 1 plague, and we have 5 successes for our enforcer. 5 minus 2 is 3, so we have 3 points of potential damage. So after we figure out our potential damage, we need to figure out if there's any armor-piercing bullets being used by our attacker, and we also need to figure out if there's any armor on our defender. Now, armor-piercing cancels armor on a 1-for-1 level. So I have armor-piercing 2, and I shoot a target with 2 armor. The armor-piercing 2 is going to cancel both levels of the armor, whereas if I have an armor-piercing on 1 versus an armor 2 target, I'm only going to cancel 1 level of the armor. Our enforcer does not have armor-piercing, and our level 1 plague only has an armor of level 1. So I'm going to subtract the armor from our total amount of successes for potential damage. So remember, that's 3 minus 1 for the armor means a total of 2 points of damage. So our level 1 plague is going to take 3 points damage minus 1 for the armor for a total of 2 points of damage. So he's going to go from uninjured to injured to dead. And that's how quick and how brutal combat can be in Deadzone. And that also shows you how highly important placement of your models is, line of sight, and also using cover can be in this game. Just to go ahead and backtrack, if our level 1 plague happened to be in a square that happened to have some cover in it, and this also happened to be turned like this, so that partially blocked part of the base. So if we got down and we did the line of sight, we'd see that part of the base would be blocked. So he would have lost 2 dice from his shooting for the bonus for having 100% pure line of sight. And our plague actually would have got 1 more dice to roll because they were in cover. That would have made a totally different situation. It would have went from 7 dice versus 3 dice to 5 dice versus 4 dice, which means that this level 1 plague probably would have survived that gunfire. The final action you can do in Deadzone besides throwing grenades is going ahead and going into Overwatch. And basically what it means when you go into Overwatch is this model is basically looking for any movement anywhere around it. And if it ever sees any movement at the beginning or at the end of that movement, it has a potential ability to react. Every single model has different things that they can do in Overwatch, and it's actually listed on each model's card. For example, you have your Stage 1 Plague leader. He has the ability, the only thing he can do when he's in Overwatch is he can move. You have your general, the only thing he can do in Overwatch is to move. And then you have your units like your general enforcer. What they can do is they can do a shoot or blaze away action when they're in Overwatch. And basically the way Overwatch is going to work is if you happen to be in Overwatch and your opponent happens to move any model in your line of sight, so for example, if he's in Overwatch and my opponent decides to move this model, the moment he moves that model, he's going to get an Overwatch reaction, and I can either shoot or blaze away because those are my 2 Overwatch actions. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll 3 dice, and I'm basically looking for a 6 or higher, and if I get at least a 6 or higher on one of these dice, I'm going to get to do one of my Overwatch actions. And the amount of successes I'm going to get is going to judge how soon I can actually do my Overwatch action. So if I happen to only get 1 success, I can do my Overwatch action at the end of this creature's move. So once it moved here, I can either do a shoot or blaze away action with this enforcer. Remember, his only actions in Overwatch are shoot or blaze away. And the reason why that's very important is if, for example, if I had started right here with this model in Overwatch, and then my opponent on his turn had decided to activate this model, and he had moved him over here as his Overwatch action, if I rolled the 3 dice and I only got 1 success, I can only react at the end of this model's movement. Well, you see at the end of his movement, he's no longer in line of sight, so my Overwatch actually doesn't do anything, and my Overwatch actually goes away. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum of that, if I happen to roll very, very well on my dice, and I happen to get 3 dice that all happen to be a 6 or higher, if I got a 6, 7, or 8, I would be able to keep my Overwatch because I got 3 successes and actually take that shoot or blaze away action either before he moves or after he moves. And obviously if I want to do the shoot action, I'm probably going to want to do it before he moves so I can go ahead and try to take him out. The only action remaining that I haven't explained to you is throwing grenades, and they're pretty easy. You're basically going to throw dice, try to hit a square. Remember, you're actually going for a square, not versus a target when you're throwing a grenade. Then the grenade's going to go off and do damage and possibly knock models out of that square and possibly cause a lot of havoc. That's all the actual game mechanics for Deadzone. There's one last thing to explain to you about Deadzone. I want to save it for last because this can be the most potentially hardest thing to learn because it's going to cause a lot of memory and basically you're just going to have to get used to the mechanics. Basically, every single model has a whole bunch of special abilities and special skills that are going to modify everything I just showed you. Every single model in the game is going to have different special abilities, and basically it would take me forever to go over every one of these abilities and explain exactly how they work, especially since they're very pretty self-explanatory and usually can be explained in one single sentence. Just know that every time you have a model, anytime you do anything with them, when you're learning the game, look up each one of those special abilities and learn how exactly it's going to affect everything. For example, when you have your Enforcer Captain, he has a special ability, Tough, which means he's going to take less damage every time he's hurt. The amount of damage you may want to look up in case you forget exactly how that works. Some models have things called jump jets, which means that they don't have to actually have a wall to climb up. You may have your units such as your Plague 1 level 1. Before he can get up on this cube, he actually has to have a wall to climb up on, which means he can't come up from the side because the back half of this building right here, and actually I'll show you with this building over here so I don't tip everything over. You'll see the back half of this building doesn't have any walls on two of the sides. So this guy, if he happened to be here, he can't actually get up onto this building from this square because there's nothing for him to grab onto. But some of these models have jump jets, which means that they can actually just climb up without having a wall to access. So somebody like this trooper right here, even though there's no wall to climb up here or here, he can just fire his jump jets and immediately go up on that upper square. Whereas this Plague guy has no ability to do that. There's tons of special abilities like venomous abilities, there's vulnerabilities and everything. All these different models have different special abilities. Most of them are positive, some of them are negatives, but you definitely want to make sure you look those up and basically get the feel for how they work so you learn how the game plays. Another really good example for that would be the sniper. Now remember, shooting is normally a short action. Well, the sniper, when he uses a sniper gun, and only when he uses a sniper gun, he actually comes equipped with two guns. His sniper gun is a range 10, but it's also a single shot item. And deliberate. Now the single shot means that this weapon cannot be used for blazing away, it can only be used for shooting, which makes perfect sense. You're not going to lay suppressive fire with a sniper rifle. And deliberate means that any shoot, blaze away, or throw grenade actions you do with that weapon are going to be long actions. Well, the sniper rifle, since it's a single shot, can't do a blaze away, and it's not a grenade item, so the only thing left for it to do is do shoot. And that means that anytime you use the sniper rifle, the only thing you do with it is shoot, and it's a long action. Luckily, the sniper has a backup pistol, and while that is also a single shot item, which means it can't be used for blazing away, and again, that makes sense, a pistol, a little handgun, probably not going to do too much suppressive fire. But the nice thing is it doesn't have that deliberate downfall, which means that the sniper could move as a short action, and then as a short action, they pull out their pistol and take a shot at anything within 3 squares. So he could still shoot at possibly that model. So that's pretty much the hardest part of all these models, is just learning that little section of every single model's card. It's going to tell you what kind of special abilities they have. It's also going to tell you what kind of weapons they're equipped with, and it's also going to tell you if that weapon is a melee weapon or if it's a ranged weapon. Now, if any weapon has the letter F next to it, that means it's a melee weapon, which means it's going to be used in fight tests only. It's obviously not a ranged weapon. And then anything else is going to be a ranged weapon. It's going to be used to shoot from 1 square away or further. I think I've gone over enough to show you how to play Deadzone. I think I've given you a really good idea of the mechanics of the game and exactly how the game is played. I didn't take the time to show you setup because I actually want to include that in my second video where I'm actually going to set up the game and actually show you some sample gameplay so this all can be thrown together and start making sense to you. I also didn't take the time to discuss the campaign system and the psychic rules and also the full campaign system where people actually fight over checkpoints and have this large map where it's not actually a map that they're playing on, but the results of each one of these little mini combats is going to affect the overall effects of this large map that you're kind of keeping off to the side with checkpoints. We're all battling over these checkpoints, trying to capture them. Whoever gets the most checkpoints in the overall grand campaign wins the final overall battle. And information on all that is actually included in the PsyOps campaign, which actually tells a story of a planet that's been taken over by the plague. And I didn't get into this too much. I'm actually going to talk about this in my review. There's some extremely rich background history on this game. This game, even though it just pretty much just came out, I know this is operating in Mantic's little scenario world of the futuristic and everything with the warpath. universe. This game has a lot of rich details, and actually, not to segue here, I would actually love to see this game brought out as an RPG. If Mantech would get a hold of Steve Jackson Games and bring out a supplement possibly for GURPS or something like that, I'd probably be throwing my money down, because there's some rich story potential in this game that is a really cool universe that I actually find a lot of interesting things. They've done a great job creating some really good storyline in this board game. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the YouTube comments below. I hope I've given you a really good overview of how exactly Deadzone plays. I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up here, and then I'm going to go to shoot my second video where I'm going to actually show you the setup for the game and actually show you some sample gameplay. Thanks for watching.